Welcome to the Supported Living Property Podcast with your host, me, Lisa Brown, the place to learn about supported living property investing. Hi, John. It's great to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, really good. And thanks. Nice to speak with you today, Lisa. Just back from 10 days leave. So yes, feeling rested and ready for the next set of challenges, I guess.
Fantastic. For people who don't know you, John, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Yeah, of course. So I'm John Cowman and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Mencap and have been now for about 5.5 years. So I'm Mencap, as you know, is the leading charity for people with learning disabilities in the UK and has a variety of activities and services that we offer. And my portfolio covers all of our direct service offerings. So from social care through to employment, through to retail stores, etc. So a really exciting job. I'm a physiotherapist by background and qualified in Dublin back a long time ago. I won't say when, but enough that I've passed my 20th anniversary, certainly. But I joined, I pursued physiotherapy as a career because I always had a real passion for working with people with long-term intractable disabilities as opposed to short-term sports injuries. And I've worked extensively throughout my career in the NHS and in the charitable sector with people from very severe head injury, cerebral palsy, spina bifida, and then certainly in the last 15 years, predominantly with people with learning disabilities. So I'm very, very driven to making a difference. I genuinely believe that everybody with the right support can live, independent and fulfilled lives and become active citizens in their own communities. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's where I'm at Mencap.
Fantastic. And that leads really nicely into why we're talking about supported living, really, doesn't it? It's a nice kind of introduction into it about, and I guess one of the questions I'd like to ask you is, why is supported living needed from your perspective? What is it about supported living that's needed?
Yeah, I think it's part of the overall evolution for people with learning disabilities and other support needs. If we go back to the publication of Valuing People back in the late 90s, and what that really brought was that concept that living a life in an institutionalized way was just not right. One of my dear colleagues, Gary Shipley, told me and reminds me often of the phrase "gone around the bend," and that phrase comes from the fact that institutions like long stay hospitals, etc., for people with learning disabilities weren't visible from the road, and you had to go round the bend to find them. And
I didn't know that's where it came from.
Yes, that's where the phrase, they've gone around the bend comes from. And what an awful way to live your life. And so the advent of community living from long stay hospitals with their closure in the 90s was great, and it brought people more visibly into the communities. However, the institutionalization of those homes remained, that kind of residential care, and supported living broke that down. How wonderful that somebody became a tenant for the first time rather than a resident. How wonderful that people could spend their money the way they wanted to spend their money and make the life choices that they needed to make. And so that's what supported living represents to me. It's freedom of choice, it's independence, it's the ability to make mistakes, the ability to take risk, which I think is fundamental to growth and happiness for us all, not just for people with learning disabilities. So I think it's an absolute, we have a lovely phrase at Mencap, and it was something that I heard in the first days after joining, and it stays with me all the time, is that we want people to live in ordinary houses on ordinary streets. We want them to have ordinary lives. And with an ordinary life, same as yours and mine, Lisa, comes risk and comes anxiety sometimes and comes uncertainty. And we're not trying to remove that. And I think supported living and the arrangements within supported living helps us to encourage those things for people much more than residential care. So it's why it is absolutely the predominant style of support that we provide at Mencap, and increasingly so. We signed up to a strategy 3 years ago to never open another residential care home at Mencap, and we haven't. So we don't accept any, if local authorities ask us, we will set up support services, but only in supported living or in domiciliary care, not in residential care. And we've held strong to that, despite some of the opportunities that have come to us to take on residential care. We have chosen not to do that. And I think that's absolutely right.
That's really fascinating. That's really good to hear, that you've got that and that's what you're sticking with. And I guess people often have a preconception of what supported living properties are like. And I think everyone, sometimes they've got it right, sometimes they've got it wrong. But I guess what kind of property is needed when you're talking about supported living properties? What sort of properties?
So I guess I've summed it up in that phrase, ordinary houses on ordinary streets.
Yeah.
I love when I go out to services, and I do it all the time. And I know it's on a certain road, and I never look at the number of the house before I get there. I know what road I'm traveling to, because I want to know if I can pick it out. And I'm always really encouraged when I can't.
Great.
I'm always really encouraged when I get there and I think it could be any one of these houses. And the only reason I know which one it is because I have the address. And that's what I want for everyone with a learning disability, is just to be on an ordinary street, part of the community, not identifiable as any particular type of citizen with any particular characteristics, but just to be free to live their lives where they want to live. Now, I think I spoke about the evolution of supported living, from that point of residential care. And I think we're in for some really exciting times. And I think the reason for that is that as it's evolved, in the same way that the long stay hospitals closed, but we still maintained residential care, one of the characteristics of supported living that has survived the evolution is group living. And so the types of properties that we see in supported living are also often quite large properties. They probably have 3 to 4 adults on average living in them. And then you've got, in a lot of them, you might have a sleep-in room, or you'll have some type of space. So they tend to be those kind of 4 or 5 bedrooms, quite big properties. In Mencap's case, I'm delighted to say that in partnership with our housing arm, Golden Lane Housing, we have beautiful properties, and the standard of our properties is exceptionally high. That's not always the case. It's not always possible as well, especially where social housing is given over to supported living. And we see maybe properties that are a bit tired and a bit run down. For me, though, is group living the way forward? And the way I think about this is that I think it could be a very good choice for some people, but for many people it's imposed upon them because of the nature of the properties. So, organizations like Mencap have landlord or lease agreements, and in some cases rare, but we own some properties, and so we're bought into those properties. It brings certain challenges, so why would I want to choose who a person lives with? That's not my choice. And whilst we do a lot to enable choice, at the end of the day, it's a bit limited in terms of, you're living in a house where 3 other people are going to live, and we will choose those people with you. But nonetheless, you're not choosing to live alone, or not alone, but live independently. And so I think the next evolution of supported living is towards front door living. And I've seen great examples of this in Mencap, where we've worked with local authorities for independent apartments and flats for people. And I've seen it firsthand also in in Holland and other places where it works wonderfully well, and people have the whole freedom to design their own property the way they want it, to live independently and be able to close their door and make the choices they wish, but to have the support around them. And I think, Lisa, as we move forward, that's going to become far more common. However, in order for local authorities to make that work, I think it will probably involve clustered environments. And I know the concept of core and cluster can really ring alarm bells with some people. And what I'd say to that is the core and clusters that existed some years back also existed with less sophisticated practice and less sophisticated regulation and less sophisticated and lower expectations of support standards. Now that we have largely addressed those things, so at Mencap we've got the best practice framework I've worked with called What Matters Most. We are, as you know, regulated by CQC in England and then CIW and RQIA in Wales and Northern Ireland. And I think core and cluster, in the presence of good practice frameworks and good regulation, can be totally liberating for people with learning disabilities. So in terms of the properties going forward, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. At the very least, I think we will see renovation of tired properties or the purchase of much higher spec properties. And the other thing that I would mention here is properties that have the ability to be readily, there's a word and it's gone out of my head, that they can be readily adapted is the word I'm looking for people with various needs, so that it's not a static property. For example, you know, wouldn't it be lovely to live in a listed building? Well, it would, until you need a stair lift. So we have to have properties that are readily adapted, but I do think we'll move more and more towards front door living.
And by that front door living, you're talking about there being some communal space or some staff on site, so there's access if people support, if people need it. Is that what you're thinking, or are you thinking?
We have both. So we do have environments where you've got independent flats. Beautiful one in Taunton, where we've got beautiful independent flats, and they have communal spaces that people can access. We also have other places which don't have large communal spaces, much more what you would be used to if you've lived so I live in an apartment and there's no communal space within my block. And a lot of us are used to that. The other model that we have in Newcastle, which I love, is an environment where we have, I think, somewhere in the region of 12 to 16 apartments. There's probably 6 or 7 different social care providers there. So you don't have to be supported by Mencap to live there. You could be supported by the Brandon Trust, or you could be supported by Dimensions, and they're in reaching to you because that's your property, that's where you live. And then in that particular circumstance, Mencap don't provide any of the social care support, but we provide all of the concierge services.
Right.
So we manage the communal spaces, and we help with people's finances, etc. And that's a fantastic model. It again shows you the level of choice that people can invoke, in the sense that it's not a single provider. And I think that's fantastic. Very similar to the model in Holland that I've seen. So it's a variety. Ideally, first and foremost, I want people to be active citizens in their community. Now, having communal space often helps you to develop that very local home network, if it's within a block of apartments, for example. not having that communal space sometimes encourages you to go out into your community to find those relationships and that socialization. So I think it's different for each person, and fundamentally, as we all know, what we want supported living to be is what the person wants, and in order to do that, we have to have as much choice as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there's issues with supply of properties at the moment. What do you see as the issues of trying to get properties for individuals at the moment?
Well, I mean, we know that social housing, it's in itself a critical area of under-resource, and therefore finding properties that will be supported through housing benefit, etc., is in that category. There's also the adaptation potential. That's always an issue. So I think there's a lot of simple, some more complex adaptations, but nonetheless they're essential. And just picking up an apartment off the normal supply chain, it might not work for everyone. So I think the adaptations is a particular thing. And then I think it's also around I wonder sometimes, is it more around the rental caps by local authorities that drive the lack of supply as opposed to the fundamental lack of housing? I don't think that's necessarily as important as the limitation on choice because of rentals. Now, we see this particularly in the southeast. As you know, Mencap operates across the entire of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Southeast England is a particular problem for us because the properties demand much higher rents, and local authorities struggle then to afford that through housing benefit. What we're seeing increasingly, and we're working with several property developers, Golden Lane Housing included, is that they are repurposing available stock.
Yeah.
So we've got an example where, for example, recently we've purchased a hotel, and then we're repurposing that by adapting it into front door living units, which is a good example of how you can use something that is available to us, but as I say, to repurpose it. And the other thing that we're seeing is new builds, you know, and property investors thinking of supported living at the point of design, rather than at the point of purchase. And that's a really big difference, because that's when we can have flexible adaptations. It's where we can drive really high quality living environments for people with learning disabilities, but in a way that suits their needs and suits the available support. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the supply and some of the challenges we're facing.
And when you're talking about those adaptations, what kind of things do you think people need to be thinking about at those levels?
So some of the stories, it's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Some of the stories that have really impacted on me are particularly people who are in long stay placements in assessment and treatment units, and rather than almost step them down into residential care, we've gone from ATU to supported living
straight away.
And beautiful example of a young man, his name is Shan, and he would be very happy for me to talk to you about him. Lived in England. His family are from Derry in Northern Ireland, and about 2 years ago we repatriated Shan. He was on a 4-to-1 care package in an ATU. He now
Can I just explain that to people? So that means 4 members of staff supporting him. No, it's fine. It's just so people understand. So that's 4 members of staff supporting him 24 hours a day. Yes,
he was in a long stay hospital, always with 4 people around him. Shan now lives in this beautiful bungalow in Derry. It's about a mile from his family, so he's back at home. He only ever has 2-to-1 support, so 2 people, not 4. Very often he has 1 person. He's out in the community with the support. He hadn't been out of the long stay hospital in years, and that all went supported living. So for him particularly, the adaptations are a little bit unusual. So really good soundproofing. So Shan is when he expresses himself, he's quite loud. A lot around the durability of fixtures and fittings, because unfortunately when he does display behaviors that challenge. They can be quite violent, and he can break things, so some durability there. He lives in a very minimalist environment, so there aren't very many trappings or items that can be moved about, so his TV is behind protective screens, etc. For others, it might be a lot around mobility. So, you know, it could be ramps, it could be, and where possible, we try to camouflage those as much as possible, because it's one of the ways in which you'll identify that somebody is vulnerable. So we try not to. And it can be anything then. It can be stair lifts, it can be, you know, high-low kitchens, it can be bigger spaces for turning circles of wheelchairs, etc. So the list is reasonably infinite, I would say. But I would say this, that then the other big adaptations obviously now are assistive technology. So things where we can have people take control of their environments, that might be curtains, blinds, it can be things like medication prompts, etc., where the assistive technology is really enabling a more independent life. So lots and lots of different things. The property question is, though, you know, I've given you the extreme of a listed building that you can't adapt, but there's a lot of newer properties that are built in a way that some of, for example, soundproofing is very difficult, or the walls are not, it's not brick, and they don't lend themselves very well to kind of physical abuse at times. So that's what I mean by the adaptations, and that's why thinking supported living at the point of design, wonderful. You know, more of that, please, rather than adapting buildings that may not be suitable for purpose.
Absolutely. And it's getting providers involved early, isn't it? Having the conversations about people who are going to be living in the properties and really working that out. And if you can do that and get something that's going to meet everyone's needs, then you're going to have long-term tenants, aren't you, as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really nice. So we have a wonderful scheme, and I love the name of it. It's just called Great Tenants. And the reason we call it that is that people with learning disabilities make great tenants. You know, they often stay for quite a long time, not like, you know, the general public who might be changing tenancy all the time, and as a landlord you have to go and find new things. Don't, you know, and they're really proud of where they live. You know, these are people who are delighted to have independence on their own property. They love socializing, etc., but they're not often the ones who have the noisiest parties. Do you know that way? And so we describe this kind of this great tenants as a means by which landlords should really be delighted to have people with learning disabilities as their tenants, because they really are great. And, you know, it leads me on to that bit about, you know, if I was going to offer some advice to developers, or it would be involve as you say, the providers, but hey, involve people with learning disabilities in your design, not just the providers of the support, but go and speak to people with learning disabilities, understand what it is. Don't scrimp. You know, this is not a privilege. You know, we all want to live in nice environments, and if you're going to design environments for supported living, make sure they're really nice. You know, make sure that they've got good fixtures and fittings. You know, this is as important for people with learning disabilities as it is for you and I. As I've already mentioned, think of adaptations, think of what it would take. I would strongly advise any potential developers to be thinking of the role of assistive technology and how they can fit that out at design, at build, because it will save people a lot of money in the long term if you're thinking more digitally enabled and assistive technology enabled living. And then finally, I would just say, you know, really think about how you can achieve independence and choice around that front door living. And let's not have everybody living in just apartments. There are different ways. I mean, you will know it from maybe student days or other times in your life where you've lived in a house that's being converted. You know, it's still front door living, but it's not all just traditional or all one size fits all. So be imaginative, just and also that what you described there, think of those communal spaces and how you might exploit some of the natural space on the footprint to help people come together and enjoy life and enjoy socializing.
Oh, John, that's been brilliant. Thank you. It's been really great chatting to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa.